The ink hadn't even dried on the divorce papers before he started laughing. He called her a burden. He called her ordinary. He thought he was finally cutting loose the anchor, dragging him down from the high society life he felt he deserved. He didn't check who her father was. He didn't ask about the phone calls she received the moment she walked out the door. He just signed, mocked her cheap coat, and poured himself a scotch. But he forgot the first rule of power. True wealth doesn't shout. It whispers. And the woman he just discarded wasn't a burden. She was the owner of the bank that held his mortgage. This is the story of how Bennett Caldwell lost everything by signing his name. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor executive suite, blurring the lights of downtown Chicago into smeary, impressionistic streaks. Inside the office of Caldwell and Associates, the atmosphere was sterile, cold, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and arrogance. Bennett Caldwell sat behind his desk, a slab of imported Italian marble that cost more than the average sedan. He didn't look up as Ellison entered. He kept his eyes fixed on the quarterly projections on his screen, making a show of how little her presence mattered. Ellison stood by the door, clutching her worn canvas tote bag. She wore a simple beige cardigan that had seen better days, and jeans that were practical, not fashionable. To the casual observer, she looked like a tired schoolteacher or a librarian. To Bennett, she looked like a mistake he had made in his 20s, a mistake he was about to correct. "The papers are on the credenza, Ellison," Bennett said, finally flicking his gaze toward her. His voice was smooth, practiced, devoid of any warmth. "I've already signed. I just need your scribble, and you can go back to whatever it is you do all day." Clipping coupons? Knitting socks? Ellison walked to the credenza. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She looked resigned. "Hello, Bennett. No, how are you? No thanks for coming?" Bennett let out a short, derisive laugh. He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. "Let's not pretend this is a social call. This is a transaction, a liquidation of a bad asset. You get the small apartment in the suburbs and the Honda. I get my life back. It's generous, considering you brought nothing into this marriage but debt and a cat." He walked over to the minibar and poured himself a double shot of Macallan 25. He swirled the amber liquid, watching her pick up the pen. "I supported you while you built this firm, Bennett," Ellison said softly. She wasn't pleading. She was stating a fact. "I worked 2 jobs so you could take those unpaid internships. I paid for your first suit." "And you've been repaid," Bennett snapped, his veneer of cool detachment cracking for a second. "I paid off your student loans. I bought you that car. But let's be real, Ellison. You don't fit here." He gestured vaguely at the opulent office, then at the city skyline beyond. "I'm merging with the Donovan Group next month." "Do you know what that means? It means galas in Zurich. It means dinners with senators. I can't have a wife who looks like she buys her wardrobe by the pound at a thrift store standing next to me. It's bad for the brand." Ellison looked down at the divorce decree. "Irreconcilable differences. Is that what this is about? Sienna?" Ellison asked. She didn't say the name with jealousy, but with a strange kind of pity. Bennett smirked. "Sienna understands this world. She's a VP of marketing. She speaks 3 languages. She looks the part. You're invisible, Ellison. You've always been invisible." He took a sip of his scotch, enjoying the burn. "Sign it, Ellison. Stop dragging this out. You're getting a settlement. Take it and find a nice, quiet life where you don't have to pretend you understand what a hedge fund is." Ellison uncapped the pen. For a moment, she hesitated. Not out of love, but out of a final ethical pause. She looked at him, searching for any trace of the man she had married 5 years ago, the man who had ambition, but also a heart. She found only greed and vanity. "You're right, Bennett," she whispered. I don't fit in your world." "Finally," he muttered. She signed her name, Ellison Vane. The scratch of the pen against the paper seemed to echo in the silent office. She placed the pen down gently. "It's done," she said. Bennett strode over, snatched the papers, and checked the signature as if he expected her to trick him. "Perfect. My lawyer will wire the settlement funds to your account within 48 hours. Try not to spend it all on cat food." He turned his back on her, returning to his window, looking out at the city he felt he owned. "You can leave your key on the desk on your way out." "And Ellison?" "Yes?" "Don't come back. The security downstairs has been updated. You won't be on the list." Ellison placed her house key on the marble desk with a soft clink. "Goodbye, Bennett. I hope the view is worth it." She turned and walked out. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, Bennett raised his glass to his reflection in the window. "To freedom," he toasted, "and to upgrading." He had no idea that the settlement he was so proud of was less than the interest Ellison's family earned in a single hour. Ellison walked out of the Caldwell and Associates building and into the pouring rain. She didn't open an umbrella. She just let the cold water hit her face, washing away 5 years of pretenses. She stood on the curb, the busy Chicago traffic rushing past, splashing dirty water onto her jeans. Bennett was right about one thing. She had been invisible. But he was wrong about the reason. She hadn't been invisible because she was nothing. She had been invisible because she was hiding. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, extended wheelbase, painted in a shade of midnight blue, so deep it looked black. The windows were heavily tinted. Passers-by stopped to stare. In this part of the financial district, luxury cars were common, but a Phantom of this caliber, with diplomatic flags on the fender, was a rare sight. The rear door opened. A man in his 60s stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. He wore a suit that cost more than Bennett's entire office fit-out. His posture was military stiff, his expression grave, but kind. "Mrs. Caldwell?" the man started, then corrected himself immediately. "Miss Vane. My apologies." Ellison looked at him and offered a tired, genuine smile. "Hello, Arthur. You're right on time." Arthur Penderecki, the head of private security and legal counsel for the Kavanagh Vane Trust, held the umbrella over her, shielding her completely from the rain. "The board has been notified of the signature. The trust is unlocked. Fully. Your grandmother was anxious." "Grandmother is always anxious," Ellison said, stepping into the plush leather interior of the car. The warmth hit her instantly, along with the scent of jasmine and aged wood. Arthur closed the door and slid into the front passenger seat. As the car pulled away, gliding silently into traffic, Arthur turned back to face her. "We have taken the liberty of retrieving your personal items from the suburban residence. They are already being transported to the penthouse at the St. Regis. Is there anything else you require from your former life?" Ellison looked out the tinted window. She saw the Caldwell building towering above, a monument to Bennett's ego. "No, Arthur, nothing." "Very good. And regarding Mr. Caldwell?" Arthur asked, his tone dropping an octave. "The chaotic nature of his business filings. We have completed the audit you requested 6 months ago. The man is leveraged to the hilt. He's borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. He thinks the merger with Donovan will save him." Ellison leaned back into the seat, closing her eyes. "He thinks he's a shark, Arthur. But he's just a minnow in a tank he doesn't understand." "Shall we initiate the protocols?" Arthur asked. "Not yet," Ellison said, opening her eyes. They were no longer the soft, passive eyes Bennett was used to. They were sharp, cold, and brilliant, the eyes of a woman who had been trained since birth to manage a dynasty worth $3 trillion. Let him have his victory lap. Let him feel the high. It will make the fall so much more educational. "As you wish, Miss Vane. Where to?" "The hangar. The jet is ready?" "Fueled and filed for Paris, madame. The family is waiting." As the Rolls-Royce dissolved into the city traffic, Ellison pulled a phone from her tote bag. It wasn't the cracked iPhone she used around Bennett. It was a secure satellite device with no brand markings. She dialed a single number. "It's done," she said into the receiver. "Initiate the acquisition of Aurora Holdings, and tell the board I'm coming home." 3 weeks later, Bennett Caldwell felt like a god. The divorce was finalized with record speed, thanks to his aggressive lawyers. He had moved Sienna into the penthouse suite of the Ritz-Carlton while he renovated his bachelor pad. The merger with the Donovan Group was in the due diligence phase, and the media was eating it up. "Rising star of fintech," the headlines read. "Caldwell to revolutionize mobile banking." Bennett sat in the private dining room of Le Bernardin in New York, across from Sienna. She was stunning, wearing a red dress that left little to the imagination, her diamond earrings catching the light. She was everything Ellison wasn't: loud, vibrant, and hungry for attention. "To us," Sienna cooed, clinking her champagne flute against his. "And to the Donovan deal. I heard the signing bonus alone is going to be 8 figures. "Low 8 figures, Bennett corrected with mock humility, though his chest swelled. "But the real money is in the stock options. Once we go public, we're talking hundreds of millions. We'll be royalty, Sienna." Sienna giggled. "I've already looked at summer homes in the Hamptons, and maybe a chalet in Aspen. Oh, and Bennett, we need to get on the list for the Met Gala next year." "Consider it done," Bennett said, taking a bite of his lobster. "I'm meeting with a new investor group tomorrow. Aurora Holdings. They popped up out of nowhere, based in Zurich and Singapore. They want to inject capital into the post-merger entity. It's practically free money." "Aurora Holdings?" Sienna frowned slightly. "I haven't heard of them." "That's because they're exclusive, babe. Private equity at the highest level. They don't advertise. They find you." Bennett wiped his mouth. "My broker said they've been watching my career for 5 years. They think I'm a visionary." "Of course they do," Sienna purred. Bennett's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. An unknown number. "Ignore it," Sienna said. "It might be the Donovan team," Bennett said, picking it up. "Caldwell here." "Mr. Caldwell," a voice said. It was deep, distorted slightly, likely by a poor connection or digital masking. "This is regarding your meeting with Aurora Holdings tomorrow at 10 a.m. "Yes, I'm confirmed. Who is this?" "This is a courtesy call. The CEO of Aurora will be attending personally. They rarely attend preliminary meetings. You should be prepared." Bennett felt a jolt of excitement. "The CEO? That's fantastic. What's his name? I'll have my team run a brief." There was a pause on the other end. A silence that felt heavy. "The CEO is not a he, Mr. Caldwell, and she does not require a brief. She knows everything about you. Just bring your A game. And Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes? Wear the blue tie, the one you wore to your wedding. She likes nostalgia." The line went dead. Bennett frowned, looking at the phone. "Weird." "What?" Sienna asked, reapplying her lipstick. "The investor said the CEO is coming, and gave me fashion advice." He shook his head, laughing it off. "These eccentric billionaires, they love their power plays." "Who cares?" Sienna shrugged. "As long as the check clears." The next morning, Bennett entered the conference room of the Four Seasons, where the meeting was scheduled. He had ignored the advice and wore a red power tie. He wasn't going to let some unknown CEO dictate his wardrobe. The room was impressive, overlooking Central Park, but the room was empty, save for a single man standing by the window. It was Arthur Penderecki. Though Bennett didn't know him, Arthur turned. He wasn't wearing the security uniform now. He was in a charcoal 3-piece suit that screamed old money. "Mr. Caldwell," Arthur said, "please sit." "I'm here to see the CEO of Aurora," Bennett said, checking his watch. "I'm a busy man. The CEO is running 2 minutes late. Her jet from Monaco had a headwind," Arthur said calmly. "I am the liaison. My name is Arthur." Bennett sat, annoyed. Fine, let's talk numbers. I'm looking for a $50 million injection for a 10% equity stake. Non-negotiable. Arthur smiled. It was a shark's smile. We are prepared to offer 100 million. Bennett's eyes widened. 100? For what percentage? For control, Arthur said. 51%. Bennett laughed out loud. You're joking. I'm not selling my company. This is a partnership, not a takeover. Oh, it's not a takeover, Mr. Caldwell, Arthur said, sliding a thick file across the table. It's a rescue. Bennett opened the file. His smile vanished. Inside were photocopies of his private ledgers, the hidden debts, the creative accounting he had used to hide losses from the Donovan Group, the offshore accounts he hadn't declared to the IRS. Where did you get these? Bennett hissed, his face draining of color. Aurora Holdings is very thorough, Arthur said. We know you're insolvent, Bennett. If the Donovan Group sees this, the merger is dead. You'll be investigated for fraud. You'll go to prison. Bennett felt sweat trickle down his back. Who are you, people? We are the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment, Arthur said. We buy 51%. We clean up the mess. You stay on as the face of the company. You keep your title, you keep your office. But we own you. The door to the conference room opened. I think Arthur has made the terms quite clear, a voice said. Bennett froze. The voice was familiar, but it was different. Commanding, resonant, polished. He turned around. Walking into the room was a woman wearing a white Dior suit, tailored to perfection. She wore heels that clicked with authority against the parquet floor. Her hair, once frizzy and tied back in messy buns, was now a sleek, dark curtain of silk. On her neck sat a sapphire necklace that looked heavy enough to sink a small boat. She walked to the head of the table and sat down. She looked at Bennett with eyes that held the weight of oceans. Hello, Bennett, Ellison said. Bennett's mouth fell open. He looked at Arthur, then back at the woman. Ellison? What are you doing here? How did you get in here? I own the room, Bennett, she said, interlacing her fingers on the table. In fact, I own the hotel. And as of this morning, through Aurora Holdings, I own your debt. This is a joke, Bennett stammered, standing up. You clip coupons. You drive a Civic. This is some kind of prank. Ellison didn't blink. Sit down, Bennett. The command was so absolute, so infused with authority, that Bennett's knees buckled and he sat. You wanted a merger, Ellison said, opening a leather portfolio. You wanted the big leagues. Welcome to them. My name is Ellison Vane Kavanagh, and we have a lot of work to do if I'm going to save your pathetic little company from bankruptcy. The silence in the conference room was heavier than the marble table separating them. Bennett Caldwell sat slumped in his chair, his eyes darting between the woman he thought he knew and the stack of incriminating documents that Arthur had laid out like a tarot reading of his doom. Vane, Bennett whispered, the realization trickling in like ice water. Your maiden name. Vane. My father was Alexander Vane, Ellison said, her voice devoid of the meekness he remembered. My mother was Christina Kavanagh. You never asked about them, Bennett. In 5 years, you never once asked why I didn't have photos of my parents. You assumed it was because of poverty. It was actually for security, Bennett laughed, a ragged, hysterical sound. So what, you were playing peasant? Cosplaying as a housewife while sitting on… what? Millions? Trillions, Bennett. With a T, Arthur interjected smoothly from the side. The Vane Kavanagh Trust controls significant interests in maritime shipping, rare earth mining, and, ironically, the very banking software infrastructure your company attempts to emulate. Bennett looked at Ellison. You lied to me. For 5 years. I omitted, Ellison corrected, her gaze sharp. I wanted to know if a man could love me for me, not for the portfolio I bring to the table. I wanted to build a life with someone who valued partnership. And for a while I thought you were that man. But then the firm started making money, and you started changing. You didn't want a partner, Bennett. You wanted an accessory, and when the accessory didn't shine bright enough for your new friends, you discarded it. She reached out and tapped the file of debts, and you did it while being financially incompetent. Bennett bristled, his ego flaring up despite the danger. I built Caldwell and Associates from the ground up. You built a house of cards on a foundation of fraud, Ellison countered, her voice raising just a fraction, enough to make Bennett flinch. Embezzling from the employee pension fund to pay for the lease on the Ferrari? Hiding losses in shell companies in the Cayman Islands? The SEC would put you away for 20 years, Bennett. Arthur has already drafted the whistleblower complaint. Bennett felt the room spin. He gripped the edge of the table. So that's it? You're going to send me to jail? Revenge for the divorce? No, Ellison said, leaning back. That would be too easy, and it would destroy the company. Despite your mismanagement, the algorithm your engineers wrote is actually good. It has value. I don't destroy value, Bennett. I acquire it. She signaled to Arthur, who slid a new document across the table. It was thick, bound in blue leather. This is the restructuring agreement, Ellison explained. Aurora Holdings, my company, will acquire 51% of Caldwell and Associates. We will infuse the capital needed to pay off your debts and balance the books. The merger with Donovan will proceed. Bennett looked at the document, hope flickering in his chest. So, I stay CEO? I keep my shares? You keep the title of CEO, Ellison said, a cruel smile touching her lips, because the market trusts you. But you will have no voting power. You will have no spending authority over $5,000 without Arthur's countersignature. You will work for me. And my salary? Bennett asked. Your salary will be reduced to $1 a year, Ellison said. Your compensation will be entirely performance-based, tied to stock value, and since Aurora Holdings will own the controlling interest, your dividends will go directly toward repaying the $100 million you now owe the trust for the bailout. Bennett stood up, his face red. This is slavery. I'm working for free. You're working to stay out of federal prison, Ellison said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And you're working to keep your reputation. If you refuse, I walk out that door. Arthur sends the file to the FBI. And by dinner time, the news will break that Bennett Caldwell is a fraud. Sienna will leave you before the handcuffs are even on. Is that what you want? Bennett looked at the window. He looked at the heavy oak door. He realized he was trapped. He had built a cage of ambition, and Ellison had just locked it. He sat down slowly. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen, the same one he had used to sign the divorce papers. Where do I sign? He croaked. Ellison pointed to the bottom of the page. Right there, next to the boss. Bennett signed. His hand shook. One more thing, Ellison said as she took the papers back. The Donovan Gala is this Saturday. It's the official announcement of the merger. You will be there. You will be charming. I'll be there, Bennett muttered. Sienna is already picking out a dress. Ellison's eyes flashed with something unreadable. Yes, bring Sienna. I'm looking forward to meeting the woman who fits your world so much better than I did. Bennett looked up, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. Ellison, please, don't make a scene. I never make scenes, Bennett, Ellison said, standing up and smoothing her Dior suit. I orchestrate outcomes. She turned and walked out, Arthur trailing behind her. The room felt suddenly vast and empty, leaving Bennett alone with his victory. The Donovan Gala was the event of the Chicago social season. Held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, it was a sea of black ties, designer gowns, and forced laughter. The air smelled of expensive perfume and even more expensive champagne. Bennett stood near the ice sculpture, a glass of tonic water in his hand. He wasn't allowed alcohol. Arthur had called him an hour ago to remind him that the new management preferred a sober CEO at public functions. Beside him, Sienna was preening. She wore a dress that was perhaps a shade too bright, a neon canary yellow gown with a plunging neckline that drew eyes, though not necessarily for the reasons she hoped. She was scanning the room, looking for photographers. "This is it, Bennett," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "Look, there's Robert Donovan. We need to go say hello, and I saw the senator over by the bar." Bennett felt a cold sweat on his neck. "Let's just wait a bit, Sienna." "Wait for what?" she snapped. "We're the stars of the night. The merger is practically done. Stop acting so nervous. You look like you're waiting for an execution." "If only you knew," Bennett thought. "By the way," Sienna said, taking a sip of her martini, "did you ever find out who the investor from Aurora Holdings is? The woman you met?" "Yeah," Bennett said, his voice tight. "I met her." "And? Is she some old battle axe? Does she know anything about tech?" "She knows enough," Bennett said. Suddenly the hum of the room changed. It wasn't a silence, but a shift in frequency. Heads turned toward the massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase. The whispers started at the back of the room and rolled forward like a wave. Robert Donovan, the host and head of the Donovan Group, broke away from his conversation with the senator and walked toward the stairs with a look of reverence that Bennett had never seen him wear. "Who is that?" Sienna asked, standing on her tiptoes. At the top of the stairs stood a woman. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that draped off her shoulders, shimmering as if it were woven from stardust. It was elegant, timeless, and clearly couture, likely Givenchy. Around her neck was the sapphire necklace Bennett had seen in the conference room, but tonight, under the chandeliers, it blazed with a blue fire. She descended the stairs alone. She didn't need an escort. Every step was measured, regal. "My God," Sienna whispered. "Is that—" Bennett closed his eyes. "Yes." Ellison reached the bottom of the stairs. Robert Donovan bowed, actually bowed, and took her hand. "Miss Vane Kavanagh," Donovan's voice carried over the hushed crowd. "We are honored, truly honored. We didn't think you would attend in person." "I felt it was important to oversee my new investments, Robert," Ellison said, her voice clear and melodic. The crowd parted for her as she walked into the room. She was the sun, and everyone else was just debris in her orbit. Sienna gripped Bennett's arm so hard her nails dug into his suit. "That's Ellison? You're Ellison? The one who wore sweatpants and watched reality TV?" "She's the owner of Aurora Holdings," Bennett hissed. "She bought the debt. She owns the company, Sienna. She owns me." Sienna's face went pale, her mouth slightly open. What?" Before Bennett could answer, Ellison and Robert Donovan turned in their direction. Ellison whispered something to Donovan, who nodded enthusiastically. They began to walk toward Bennett. "Stand up straight," Bennett muttered. "Do not say anything stupid." Ellison stopped 3 feet away. Up close, the transformation was even more terrifying. The woman who used to clip coupons for tuna cans was gone. In her place was a titan. "Hello, Bennett," Ellison said pleasantly. She didn't offer a hand. "Ellison," Bennett nodded, his throat dry. "You look incredible." "Thank you." "Arthur picked it out," she said, glancing briefly at the security chief standing discreetly in the shadows. Then her eyes shifted to Sienna. The look wasn't angry. It was surgical. She scanned Sienna from the neon dress to the fake tan, to the nervous grip on the martini glass. "And you must be Sienna," Ellison said. Sienna tried to muster her usual bravado. She straightened her spine and gave a tight, fake smile. "Yes, I'm the VP of Marketing for Caldwell & Associates, and Bennett's fiancé." Bennett winced. They weren't technically engaged, but Sienna liked to stake her claim. "Fiancé," Ellison repeated, tasting the word. "How lovely. It's bold to move on so quickly, isn't it? But then again, efficiency is key in business." "I helped Bennett build this merger," Sienna said defensively, sensing she was being mocked, but not sure how. "I understand the lifestyle he needs, the image." Ellison smiled. It was a terrifyingly genuine smile. "The image, yes. Tell me, Sienna, do you know the history of the venue we are standing in?" "The hotel?" Sienna blinked. It's the Palmer house. It's old. Potter Palmer gave it to his wife, Bertha, as a wedding gift in 1871, Ellison said, her voice casual but carrying weight. Bertha was the queen of Chicago society. She didn't buy her way in with loud dresses or loud words. She ruled because she understood that true power is quiet. It's dignity. Ellison took a step closer to Sienna. Bennett signed a contract with me yesterday, Ellison said softly, so only the three of them could hear. He didn't tell you the details? Under the new restructuring, executive partners, that includes Bennett, are subject to a morals clause. It requires that their public associations reflect the dignity and heritage of the parent company, Aurora Holdings. Sienna frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, Ellison continued, her eyes hard as diamonds, that your dress is a violation of the company dress code, and your presence here, as the mistress who broke up a marriage before the ink was dry, is bad for the brand. You can't talk to me like that, Sienna's voice raised, attracting glances. Bennett, tell her. Bennett looked at the floor. Sienna, please. He can't tell me anything, Sienna, Ellison said. He works for me, and if you want him to keep his job and the paycheck that buys those martinis, you will lower your voice. Ellison turned to Robert Donovan, who had stepped back into the circle. Robert, I think Mr. Caldwell is feeling unwell. He and his guest should probably be escorted out. It would be a shame to ruin the toast. Donovan didn't hesitate. He snapped his fingers. 2 large security guards materialized. Bennett, Sienna, Donovan said coldly. The car is waiting. This is insane, Sienna shrieked, pulling her arm away from Bennett. I am the VP of Marketing. Not anymore, Ellison said calmly. I reviewed the HR files this morning. Your position was redundant. We let you go as of 5 p.m. today. Didn't you check your email? Sienna froze. The humiliation washed over her in a red tide. People were staring. Phones were out. The rising stars of Chicago were being thrown out of their own party. Bennett didn't fight. He knew the power of the checkmate. He took Sienna's arm. Let's go. No! Sienna shoved him away. She looked at Bennett with pure disgust. You said you were the boss. You said you were running things. You're just her errand boy. Sienna, stop, Bennett pleaded. I'm not leaving with you. Sienna spat. She looked at Ellison, then back at Bennett. I'm not dating a broke puppet. She turned and stormed out of the ballroom alone, her yellow dress trailing behind her like a hazard sign. Bennett stood there, alone, the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Ellison looked at him with a mixture of pity and finality. Go home, Bennett. Read the employee handbook. Be at your desk at 8 a.m. We have a lot of work to do. She turned her back on him and took Robert Donovan's arm. Now, Robert, tell me about this senator you wanted me to meet. As Bennett walked the long, lonely path to the exit, he heard the applause start behind him. It wasn't for him. It was for the Queen who had just ascended her throne. The weeks following the gala were a blur of misery for Bennett. He had expected anger from Ellison. He had expected shouting matches. What he got was far worse. Bureaucratic indifference. His office, once the jewel of the 42nd floor, was stripped. Ellison had moved the executive suite to the top floor, the 45th, which Aurora Holdings had purchased. Bennett was moved to a smaller office on the 38th floor. It had no view of the lake, only the brick wall of the adjacent building. Sienna was gone. She had cleared out the penthouse at the Ritz within hours of the gala, taking the jewelry he had bought her on credit and blocking his number. He heard through the grapevine she was now dating a hedge fund manager in Miami. Bennett sat at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet. His job was now essentially data entry. He had to approve expense reports for the engineering team. It was humiliating. But beneath the humiliation, a seed of rage began to sprout. He was still Bennett Caldwell. He had built the code. He knew the system better than anyone. Ellison might have the money, but he had the keys to the engine. He glanced at the security camera in the corner of his office. He knew Arthur watched everything. But Arthur couldn't watch his thoughts. Bennett opened a terminal window on his computer. He began to type, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. He wasn't accessing the financial records. He knew those were locked down tight. He was accessing the source code for the Sentinel algorithm, the banking software that was the crown jewel of the merger. If he couldn't own the company, he would make sure it was worthless. He planned to insert a logic bomb, a few lines of code buried deep in the subroutines that would cause the system to crash randomly once the user base exceeded 10 million, a milestone they were expected to hit 3 months after the merger finalized. It would look like a technical failure, not sabotage. The stock would tank, Ellison would lose billions, and maybe, in the chaos, Bennett could buy the pieces back for pennies on the dollar. It was a desperate, suicidal plan. But he had nothing left to lose. He worked late into the night, every night for a week. He told Arthur he was optimizing legacy code to impress the new board. Arthur seemed to buy it. On a rainy Tuesday, Bennett finally finished the payload. He hovered his finger over the Enter key. Once he executed this compile, the virus would be embedded. "Take that, you heiress witch," he thought. He pressed Enter. Instantaneously, his screen went black. A large red padlock icon appeared in the center of the monitor. Then his office phone rang. Bennett stared at the phone. It rang again. He picked it up slowly. "Hello?" "Did you really think?" a voice said. It wasn't Ellison. It was a male voice, distorted and mechanical. "That we wouldn't have keystroke loggers on your machine." Bennett dropped the receiver. The door to his office burst open. It wasn't security guards. It was 2 federal agents in windbreakers, badges hanging from their necks. FBI. Behind them stood Arthur, looking disappointed, like a teacher whose student had failed a simple test. "Bennett Caldwell," the lead agent said, stepping into the cramped office. "We have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest?" Bennett stood up, knocking his chair over. "For what? I didn't steal anything." "Attempted corporate sabotage involving critical financial infrastructure," Arthur said, leaning against the doorframe. "Under the Patriot Act, tampering with banking software is a federal felony. And since you tried to do it on a network that processes international transactions, well, let's just say you're looking at a very long vacation." I didn't execute it," Bennett stammered. "I was just testing. It was a stress test." "We have the logs, Bennett," Arthur said. "We watched you write every line. We gave you enough rope to hang yourself, and you tied a perfect noose." The agents grabbed Bennett's arms. They weren't gentle. They cuffed his hands behind his back. "Ellison set me up!" Bennett screamed as they dragged him towards the hallway. "She wanted this. She pushed me to this." Arthur stepped in front of him, blocking the path for a moment. He looked Bennett in the eye. "Miss, Vane Kavanagh gave you a second chance, Bennett. She paid your debts. She gave you a job. She let you keep your dignity. All you had to do was be humble and do the work. But your ego wouldn't allow it." Arthur signaled the agents to proceed. "She didn't set you up, Bennett. She just waited for you to be you." As Bennett was hauled through the bullpen, the employees he used to terrorize, the secretaries he ignored, the junior analysts he yelled at, stood up and watched. No one looked sad. No one looked surprised. They watched in silence as the king of fintech was dragged out into the elevator, crying about unfairness. 6 months later, the world Bennett Caldwell inhabited had shrunk from a sprawling metropolis of steel and glass to a 6 by 8 foot box of concrete and despair. The view from his window had changed drastically. Instead of the sweeping, majestic Chicago skyline, or even the dull brick wall of the adjacent office building he had grown to hate in his final days at the firm, he now looked out at a double perimeter of chain-link fence topped with razor wire that glinted maliciously in the sun. The Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville was a universe away from the penthouse at the St. Regis or the executive suite where he had once played king. It was a place where ambition went to die, suffocated by the smell of industrial disinfectant and the constant grinding noise of 1,000 men trying to survive one more day. Bennett sat on the edge of his metal bunk, his elbows resting on his knees, his head hanging low. He wore a beige jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big and scratched against his skin. His hair, which he used to style meticulously every morning with $50 pomade, was now buzzed short, exposing the pale skin of his scalp. His hands that had signed million-dollar contracts and swirled aged scotch in crystal tumblers, were now rough, red, and cracked from his assigned job in the prison laundry. The days bled into one another, a monotonous grey loop. He had spent the first month in a state of shock, the second in a rage, and the third in a deep, paralyzing depression. Now, at the 6-month mark, he was simply empty. He was a shell of the man who had mocked his wife for her cheap clothes, stripped of every illusion he had ever held about himself. Caldwell! The bark of the guard shattered his stupor. Bennett flinched, looking up as a baton rapped sharply against the steel bars of his cell. "Legal visit!" the guard grunted, unlocking the heavy door with a mechanical clank. "Move it!" Bennett perked up, a spark of desperate hope flickering in his chest. He scrambled to his feet, smoothing the wrinkles of his jumpsuit. Legal visit. It had to be Gary, his court-appointed public defender. Or maybe it was better news. He had been writing letters furiously for months. He had written to Arthur, begging for a meeting. He had written to the board of directors, pleading his case as a misunderstood visionary. He had even lowered himself to write to Sienna, asking for a character reference for his upcoming appeal hearing, though he knew deep down she was likely laughing at him from a beach in Miami. Maybe someone had finally cracked. Maybe Ellison had remembered the man she once loved and decided to show mercy. He was led down the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, the shackles at his wrists and ankles jingling with a humiliating rhythm. Other inmates watched him pass with dead eyes, but Bennett kept his gaze on the floor. He was no longer the king of fintech. Here, he was just another number. The guard shoved him into the visitation room and pointed to a chair behind a thick plexiglass divider. Bennett sat down, his heart hammering against his ribs. He clasped his hands together to stop them from shaking and looked up. He expected to see Gary's tired, overworked face. Instead, he saw Ellison. The breath left his lungs in a rush. She sat on the other side of the glass, looking like a vision from another life. She was radiant, glowing with a health and vitality he hadn't seen in years. She wore a simple trench coat over a cream-colored silk blouse, understated but undeniably expensive. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders in soft, dark waves. She looked younger, lighter, as if a great, invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But it was her eyes that struck him the most. They weren't cold, and they weren't angry. They were clear. Terrifyingly clear. She held the black plastic phone to her ear, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. Bennett scrambled to pick up his receiver, his hands trembling so violently he almost dropped it. "Ellison," he choked out, his voice raspy from disuse. "You came." "I did," she said. Her voice came through the phone, tinny and digitized, but the calm authority in her tone was unmistakable. "Arthur advised against it. He said you were a closed chapter, a liability best left in the past. But I felt I owed you one last explanation." "Explanation?" Bennett leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. "Ellison, forget the explanations. Get me out of here, please. You have the power. I know you do. I'll sign anything. I'll leave the country. I can't survive in here, Ellison. These people, they don't know who I am. They don't care." "They know exactly who you are, Bennett," Ellison said softly, her gaze unblinking. "You're inmate 8,940. That's all you are now." The reality of her words hit him like a physical blow. He slumped slightly. "I made a mistake," he pleaded, the tears he had been holding back starting to well in his eyes. "I was angry. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't mean to crash the system. I wanted to prove I still mattered. I wanted you to need me again." Ellison shook her head slowly, a gesture of profound disappointment. "You didn't want me to need you, Bennett. You wanted to control me. You couldn't stand the idea that I was the one holding the cards. There is a difference." She reached into a sleek leather bag. Bennett watched, mesmerized, hoping she was pulling out a pardon, a settlement, anything that offered a way out. Instead, she produced a single sheet of paper. It looked like a photocopy of an old legal deed, the edges slightly worn. She held it up against the glass. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. Bennett squinted, his eyes adjusting to the glare. He scanned the dense legal text. "It looks like the prenup," he muttered. "The one I made you sign, to protect my assets." He said the word assets with a bitter, self-loathing irony. He remembered that day vividly. He had been so proud, so arrogant, demanding she sign the document to protect his leased BMW, his meager savings, and his intellectual property. He had treated it like a favor to her, allowing her into his life on his terms. "You made me sign it without reading the addendum my grandfather insisted on," Ellison said. He was a suspicious man, Bennett. He built the Kavanagh empire by never trusting anyone fully, but he also believed in redemption. He believed that loyalty should be tested, and if proven, rewarded. She tapped a specific paragraph on the last page of the document. "The vain loyalty clause," she read aloud, her voice steady. "Should the spouse of the beneficiary remain in the marriage for 7 years, or support the beneficiary through a period of perceived financial hardship without complaint or infidelity, said spouse is entitled to 50% of the non-vested trust dividends upon the 10th anniversary." Bennett's mouth went dry. The noise of the prison around him, the shouting guards, the buzzing lights, faded into a dull hum. He stared at her, his brain trying to process the words. 50% of the non-vested trust dividends. He knew now what the trust was worth. He knew the scale of the Vane Kavanagh fortune. It was measured in trillions. "How much?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ellison lowered the paper. She looked at him with a strange mix of pity and detachment. "Last year's dividends alone were approximately $400 million, she said casually, as if discussing the price of a cup of coffee. "If you had stayed, Bennett, if you had just been kind, if you had just been a husband instead of a bully, you would have been worth $500 million in 2 years. Bennett felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and dizzy. He gripped the edge of the counter to keep from sliding off his chair. $500 million, he mouthed. "You wouldn't have had to work a day in your life," Ellison continued, her voice relentless but gentle. "You could have had the cars, the houses, the fame you were so desperate for. All you had to do was love me when I was poor. All you had to do was be a decent human being to the woman who washed your clothes and paid your loans." Bennett felt physically ill. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He had spent 5 years chasing pennies, stepping over a diamond to do it. He had thrown away a kingdom because he was too arrogant to see the Queen standing right in front of him. He had chased a cheap, flashy illusion with Sienna, while the real treasure was waiting at home, quietly supporting him. You never told me," he stammered, tears now streaming freely down his face. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because true wealth doesn't shout, Bennett," Ellison said, repeating the lesson he had failed to learn time and time again. "It whispers. It waits to be discovered. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could buy you, and you made your choice." She folded the paper and placed it back in her bag. The finality of the movement was like a gavel coming down. "Why are you telling me this now?" Bennett wept, his voice cracking. "To torture me? Is this your revenge?" "No," Ellison said, standing up. She smoothed her coat, looking every inch the powerful executive she was. "I'm telling you this to set you free. You were always obsessed with what you were owed, with what you deserved. You spent your life keeping score. Now you know exactly what the score is." She signaled the guard near the door that the visit was over. Panic surged through Bennett. This was it. The last lifeline was being cut. "Ellison, wait!" he screamed, slamming his open palm against the glass. The sound echoed through the room, drawing sharp looks from the guards. "Don't leave me here. I still love you. I can change. I swear I can change." Ellison paused at the heavy steel door. She looked back at him one last time. Her expression didn't waver. There was no love there, but there was no hate either. There was only the distant indifference one might feel for a stranger passing on the street. "Goodbye, Bennett," she said. "I have a board meeting in Tokyo, and I'm already running late." She hung the phone up on the cradle. The line went dead. Bennett watched her walk away, the click of her heels fading into the hum of the prison. He watched until the heavy door slammed shut behind her, sealing him in. "Let's go, Rockefeller," the guard sneered, grabbing Bennett by the arm and hauling him up. Bennett didn't fight. He couldn't. He was dragged back down the hallway, back to his cell. He sat on the bunk and stared at the grey concrete wall. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he would spend every minute of the next 8 years thinking about that clause. He had held the winning lottery ticket in his hand for 5 years, and he had thrown it in the trash because it looked wrinkled. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all morning had cleared. Ellison stepped out of the prison gates and into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet and clean. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, gleaming like a black jewel. Arthur stood by the rear door, holding it open with practiced deference. "How did it go, madame?" Arthur asked as she approached. "It's done," Ellison said, sliding into the plush leather back seat. She didn't look back at the prison walls. "The past is closed." "And the future?" Arthur asked, closing the door and settling into the front seat. Ellison smiled. It was a genuine smile, full of light and steel. She pulled out her phone and checked the market reports. The stock for Aurora Caldwell had just hit an all-time high. The removal of the toxic element, Bennett, and the strategic restructuring had reassured investors globally. Her company was thriving. Her life was her own. "The future looks profitable, Arthur," she said, looking out at the horizon. "Take us to the airport. It's time to fly." The massive car pulled away smoothly, gliding effortlessly down the road, leaving the prison and Bennett Caldwell in the dust, a forgotten footnote in the history of a dynasty that would last forever. And that is how Bennett Caldwell learned the hardest lesson of his life. He spent years chasing the appearance of success, never realizing that the greatest success was the woman holding his hand. He judged a book by its cover, and by the time he realized it was a masterpiece, he had already thrown it into the fire. Bennett thought he was the main character, but he was just a test he failed spectacularly. What would you have done if you were in Ellison's shoes? Would you have saved him from prison, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and hidden fortunes, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, remember, be careful who you mock on the way up, because you might meet them on the way down. Thanks for watching.